Welcome to Guilty Pleasure Stories channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Hello. The house was awash with a glow of fairy lights, their colors casting a soft warmth against the frosty windows. The scent of pine from the Christmas tree mixed with the aroma of gingerbread and cinnamon, creating a cocoon of festivity. It was a scene I'd worked hard to set every year, a tradition since Jackson was little this year. However, something was different. At 21, Jackson wasn't the boy excitedly unwrapping presents at the crack of dawn, or the teenager too cool to feign excitement for family traditions. That carried a depth I wasn't accustomed to seeing in my son. As I stirred the hot chocolate on the stove, I heard his familiar footsteps entering the kitchen. I looked up and saw him standing there, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You've outdone yourself, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "The house looks amazing," smiled back. "It's Christmas Eve. It's meant to feel magical." Jackson stepped closer, his presence filling the small kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching me with a quiet intensity that I hadn't noticed before. "Mom." He began, his tone hesitant. "Can we talk?" I felt a pang of unease course. "Sweetie, what's on your mind?" He hesitated, looking down at his hands before meeting my gaze again. "I've been thinking about how much you've done for me over the years, everything you've sacrificed, and I feel like I don't say thank you enough." My heart softened and I reached out to touch his arm. "Jackson, you don't need to thank me. You're my son, taking care of you, loving you. That's just what mothers do." His eyes held mine for a moment longer than I expected. There was a weight to his gaze, something unsaid, hovering in the air. Still, he continued, his voice lower. "Now, I don't think I've ever told you how much you mean to me, not just as my mom, but as a person." The words struck me in a way I couldn't quite explain. I smiled, trying to keep the mood light. "Well, I'm glad you think I'm an okay person too." Jackson laughed softly, the sound rich and warm, but his smile faded quickly. He looked away, his jaw tightening as if battling with words that refused to come out. The story below is 5,000 characters as requested. Christmas Eve confession. Christmas Eve had always been my favorite day of the year. The house sparkled with twinkling lights, their reflections bouncing off the frost-covered windows. The scent of cinnamon and pine mingled in the air as soft holiday music played in the background. Every detail was perfect, just the way I liked it, just the way Jackson remembered it from childhood. This year he was home after months away at university. At 21, he was no longer the little boy who'd tear through wrapping paper with reckless excitement, but a young man with quiet confidence and a sharp wit. Still, he smiled the same way, that wide grin that made his hazel eyes crinkle at the edges, reminding me of the boy he once was. I stood in the kitchen stirring hot chocolate over the stove, humming along to "Oh, Holy Night." The sound of footsteps made me glance up. Jackson leaned against the doorway, his frame filling the space. He was taller, now broader, but his presence carried the same warmth I'd always known. "You've outdone yourself," he said, his voice deep but soft, a smile tugging at his lips. "The place looks incredible." I smiled back, waving the ladle at him. "It's tradition besides. It wouldn't feel like Christmas without all this." Jackson stepped closer, his gaze lingering on me longer than I expected. "Yeah, it wouldn't." I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, like a shadow passing over a sunny afternoon. Dismissing it, I poured the mugs of hot chocolate and handed one to him. His fingers brushed mine, and though it was brief, the touch felt deliberate. "Thanks, Mom," he said, holding the mug with both hands as though it were something precious. "Let's sit by the fire," I suggested, nodding toward the living room. We settled on the couch, the fire crackling softly before us. For a while, we sipped our drinks in comfortable silence. I watched the flames dance their reglow, painting the room in shades of amber and gold, you know. Jackson said, suddenly breaking the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us." I glanced at him, my brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Just how much you've done for me over the years, everything you've given up to make sure I had everything I needed. That's what parents do," I said with a gentle smile. "No," he said, firmly turning to face me. "It's more than that. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it, and I don't think I've ever thanked you properly." His words tugged at my heart. "You don't have to thank me, Jackson. Being your mom is the greatest joy of my life." Jackson looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. There was something raw in his expression, something that made my breath catch. "You're more than just my mom," he said quietly. A strange silence settled between us, heavy and charged. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to process his words, the intensity in his gaze. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong. But you're the person who knows me better than anyone else, the one who's always understood me. And sometimes it feels like you're the only one who ever really sees me." My throat tightened. "Jackson, I'll always be here for you. That's never going to change." "I know," he said, his voice low, "but it's more than that. I've been feeling things lately. Things I shouldn't." I froze, the weight of his confession settling heavily in the air. I wanted to speak, to say something that would dispel the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Jackson looked at me again, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I know it's wrong," he continued, his voice trembling, "but I can't help it, and I think you felt it too." "Jackson," I said, my voice trembling, "you're my son. I love you, but not like that. This isn't something we can talk about. It's not something we can feel." He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jackson, listen to me, whatever you're feeling. It's okay to be confused, but we can't go down this road." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "No. I just needed you to know I needed to be honest." Tears stung my eyes as I pulled my hand back. "Let's just try to move past this. Okay, it's Christmas Eve. Let's focus on the good things." Jackson nodded again, though his expression remained troubled. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between us. We sat there for a while longer, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. When the clock chimed midnight, Jackson stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "I think I'm going to head to bed," he said quietly. "Good night, sweetheart," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. As he walked away, I watched him go, my heart aching with the weight of what had just unfolded. The glow of the fire dimmed as the night deepened, and I sat alone on the couch, staring at the flickering flames. Christmas Eve had always been a time for love and connection. But this year it felt as though the world I'd carefully built had shifted beneath my feet. The story continues, expanding into the requested length. Jackson couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkened room, staring up at the ceiling as the soft glow of the Christmas lights outside his window flickered across the walls. The air felt stifling despite the chill creeping through the house. His mind raced, replaying the moment he'd said too much. Why had he opened his mouth? He closed his eyes tightly, willing himself to forget the look on my face, the shock, the confusion, and the quiet hurt. I tried so hard to hide, but he couldn't. That image was seared into his memory. Jackson sat up abruptly, his hands gripping his. The sound of the crackling fire still drifted from the living room. He wondered if I was still sitting there, my thoughts likely just as unsettled as his. He stood, his steps careful and quiet as he left his room and padded down the hallway. The house was still except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. When he reached the edge of the living room, he paused. I was still there, sitting, curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over my legs. The firelight danced across my face, highlighting the lines of worry etched into my features. "Mom," he said softly, his voice breaking the quiet. I looked up, startled, but quickly composed myself. "Jackson, what are you doing up? You should be in bed." "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, stepping into the room. "Nay, could you?" It seems I gave him a small, tired smile. "Est, thinking a lot on my mind." He hesitated, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room before I gestured for him to sit. He sank into the armchair across from me, his posture tense. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper, for what I asked gently, though we both knew the answer for. Earlier, for saying too much. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers tugging at the strands in frustration. "I didn't mean to put that on you." I sighed, leaning forward and clasping my hands together. "Jackson, I'm glad you felt you could talk to me, but what you said, it caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to respond." "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly, his voice raw. I needed to be honest, but I know it was wrong. I know it's not fair to you. I studied him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his expression. He looked so much like the boy he once was, lost, unsure, desperate for guidance. Jackson, I began, carefully choosing my words with precision. I love you. You'll always have a piece of my heart that no one else can touch. But this, what you're feeling, it's something we need to work through together. It's not something we can act on or even entertain. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire. No, but that doesn't make it go away. I leaned back, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Feelings are complicated, I said after a pause. Sometimes they come from places we don't fully understand. You've been away at school, you've been figuring out who you are. And maybe being home, being close again, has stirred up things that feel bigger than they are. Jackson looked up at me, then his eyes searching mine. You think this is just me being confused? I think you're looking for connection, I said gently, and it's natural to feel safe with someone who's always been there for you. But Jackson, the lines we've built, mother and son, they're there for a reason. They're what keep us grounded, what make this relationship as strong and unshakable. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. What if I can't push it away? You can, I said firmly, though my voice softened as I continued. You're strong, Jackson, stronger than you realize, and I'm here to help you through this. But we can't let this feeling define us, or change the bond we've worked so hard to build. Jackson nodded again, his expression somber but determined. I don't want to lose you, you won't. I promised we'll get through this together. For a while we sat in silence, the only sound, the crackling of the fire. Gradually, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a tentative sense of understanding. Do you remember the Christmas when you were 8? I asked suddenly, a small smile tugging at my lips. Jackson looked at me, his brow furrowing in thought before his face lit up, the one with the sled. I laughed softly. Yes, you begged and begged for a sled, even though we didn't have much snow that year. And then when it finally snowed, you went flying down the hill and crashed straight into the neighbor's fence. Jackson chuckled the sound, easing the weight between us. Yeah, I remember you came running down the hill yelling at me for not waiting for you. And then I spent the rest of the afternoon bandaging your scraped knees, I added, shaking my head. I still have that scar, he said, a hint of pride in his voice, but maybe it'll remind you to listen to your mom next time, I teased, giving him a playful nudge with my foot. The moment felt lighter, the heaviness of earlier beginning to dissipate. We were finding our way back to the easy rhythm we'd always shared, though I knew it would take time for everything to feel truly normal again. I'll try to get some sleep, Jackson said after a while, rising from his seat. Good night, sweetheart, I said, watching him. As he walked toward the stairs, he paused at the foot of the staircase, looking back at me. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, Jackson, I replied, my voice filled with quiet hope as he disappeared upstairs. I sat by the fire for a little while longer, the glow of the flames warming the chill that had settled in my chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them together after all. Love, true unconditional love, could weather even the stormiest of nights. Jackson, I prompted, gently setting the spoon down and wiping my hands on a towel. What's wrong? He shook his head, letting out a shaky breath. It's nothing. I guess I've been thinking a lot about how close we've always been. You've always been there for me no matter what. And sometimes it feels like you're the only one who really gets me. I swallowed hard, his words stirring something deep and unnameable within me. That's what family is for, sweetheart. We're there for each other. He nodded, but the look in his eyes was far from resolved. No. Sometimes I wish things were simpler, that we could talk about everything without worrying what's right or wrong. The tension in the room thickened, wrapping around us like an invisible thread, pulling tighter with every passing second. My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. Jackson, you know you can tell me anything, I said softly. There's nothing we can't work through together. For a moment he looked as though he was going to say something monumental, but then he stopped. He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm yet tender. Thank you, he said simply, for what I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For being you, he replied. The clock chimed softly from the living room, marking the hour. The sound pulled us both from the moment, and Jackson let go of my hand, stepping back. I should probably start the fire, he said, his voice lighter now. I nodded, watching him leave the kitchen, his broad shoulders illuminated by the soft glow of the Christmas lights. As I stood there alone in the kitchen, a mixture of warmth and unease settled in my chest. Christmas Eve had always been a time for closeness, for love and gratitude, but this year the closeness felt different. It felt as though the air between us had shifted in ways I wasn't ready to understand. The fire crackled in the living room as I brought out the tray of hot chocolate. Jackson sat on the couch, his face lit by the dancing flames. I handed him a mug, our fingers brushing for the briefest moment, and his eyes flicked up to mine. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Jackson." The words felt heavy, laden with more meaning than I could unpack for the rest of the night. We sat by the fire, the glow of the flames, reflecting the unspoken truths between us by. Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.